Our next speaker comes to us from Las Vegas. He's been a speaker at our freedom rallies before, and he has a very important message to share. But the message he shares as an extra perspective, because he comes from within the ranks of the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigations. In fact, he was not just an agent. He was the chief of the Los Angeles branch of the FBI. Many of you on 405 freeway going off Wilshire exit, you see that tall building off Westwood? He was a man who headed up that office. And he retired from that, and since then, he's been doing his best to do real investigations and bring real justice to America, even if that means that the agency he used to work for, FBI, and the lawyers he worked with, the U.S. Department of Justice, and other federal government agencies like CIA and NSA are trying to do whatever they can to keep his message and his discoveries back. He's helped a lot of people. He's given literally his blood, everything he's got for the sake of freedom, for justice, for doing the right thing for America. We've recognized him previously as our freedom hero at Freedom Law School. Please help me give him a warm hand of welcome to Ted Gunderson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That and $1.65 will get you a good cup of coffee at Starbucks, okay? Actually, I had quite an illustrious career, 27 and a half years in the FBI. And in those 27 and a half years, I had 13 assignments, so I moved around the country. The only part of the country I never did live in was really the extreme northeast U.S. So also during my career, I handled just about everything. I was counter-espionage, counter-terrorism in New York and Connecticut, and I negotiated with some skyjackers at Philadelphia International Airport for 2.5 hours, July the 12th, 1972. And I ended up being in charge of most of Southern California. Had over 700 personnel under my command. I went out, left, retired, had over 600 people at my retirement party. Former Governor Jerry Brown, Gray Davis was there, Pat Brown was there, Louis L'Amour was there. It really read like who's who. I was quite flattered. But I had no idea what awaited me after I retired. I was asked by Attorney General Griffin Bell to coordinate security for the Pan American Games. Right after I retired, I did proceed to San Juan, Puerto Rico, the summer '79, coordinated it. There were some problems there. We didn't have one act of terrorism. I was patting myself on the back thinking, you did a great job, Gunderson, but I found out later they were fantastic sports fans. They didn't want to interrupt some of their sports activities. That's a true story. But I still think I did a pretty good job. Came back. I was a consultant on the '84 LA Olympics and opened my own firm in Westwood, California. My first major case was the Dr. Jeffrey R. McDonald case. It's spelled M-A-C-D-O-N-A-L-D. There's been a best-selling book, a movie on NBC. It reruns every time we are going to have some sort of a court proceedings. He's a former Green Beret doctor who was convicted of murdering his wife, 2 children. The murders occurred February 17, 1970 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was contacted by some of his doctor friends. He had just been convicted in August of 1979 and asked to investigate the case. I immediately proceeded to Terminal Island, San Pedro, California, interviewed the doctor, and I told him, I said, Doctor, if you are guilty of this horrible crime, these horrible crimes, I'm not going to work for you or with you. But if you are innocent, I will be with you as long as possible until we get you out and make a free man out of you. Believe it or not, the man is still in prison. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. He did not commit the crimes. I entered the case, spent unfortunately about $75,000 traveling around the country interviewing witnesses, et cetera, et cetera. I have about 2,000 hours in the case free. I didn't charge him or ran out of money. I'm still working for him. But the first thing you do in an investigation of this type is you read everything you can get your hands on, testimony, look at the evidence, and you go from there. Long story short, I developed 19 new witnesses, including a signed confession from Helena Stokely, the girl in the floppy hat on the street corner at 4:30 in the morning, observed by MP Micah en route to the crime scene. This case is, other than the O.J. Simpson case, I'd say has probably had more publicity, not in recent years, but in the past than any other case in the history of our country in the way of a criminal matter. In my confession, which I obtained on October 25, 1980, Helena Stokely told me that Dr. McDonald did not commit those murders. Now, I'm going to give you some details here, and I'm going to move into some other areas because I'm talking about corruption personified, okay? Helena said he did not commit those murders. They were committed by her satanic cult group. She said that her satanic cult was involved in distributing drugs up and down the East Coast. Drugs were being flown in plastic bags in the body cavities of the dead GIs coming into the air bases around the country. This is in Time magazine, January 1, 1973. You want documentation, I'll give it to you. And she said that they went in on their own, committed the murders. They were mad at McDonald, Dr. McDonald, because when their associates and friends would go to the civilian hospital where he was moonlighting, he was actually a doctor at the military hospital, he was being abusive to the ODs, those who were on overdose of drugs and so forth, and so they went in to rough him up a little bit. It got out of hand, and it was a horrible thing. Colette, the wife, was pregnant. The 2 children, 2.5 and 5.5, were brutally stabbed numerous times, over 100 stab wounds in the 3 bodies. But Helena said that when the higher-ups in the drug operation, who were government personnel, police officers, 2 attorneys in Fayetteville, North Carolina, generals, not singular, generals, top brass military officers, when they learned that this cult, this satanic cult, had committed these murders, they knew that if there was an investigation of the cult, it would expose the whole operation throughout America. And so what did they do? They covered it up. And I submitted a 1,200-page report to Judge Webster, who was my boss at one time. I was one of the top executives in the Bureau. And the judge knew me personally. In fact, he told Louis L'Amour, a Western writer, who was a friend of mine, according to Louis, that I was probably one of the best all-around agents in the history of the organization. That's what Louis L'Amour told me. But I knew Judge Webster. I knew him well, worked with him, in contact with him personally. And I submitted this 1,200-page report to him with a personal letter. Judge, I think this man's innocent. The FBI needs to look at my report and continue with my investigation. He's run out of money. Instead of a response from the FBI, I didn't even receive an acknowledgement, by the way. Next thing I hear, I'm receiving phone calls from around the country. I'm a homosexual, suffering from mental problems, a disgruntled ex-employee, was forced out of the FBI because I was a practicing Satanist, an informant for the FBI, an informant for the CIA, and it goes on and on and on. There's one person in particular right now who's spreading these rumors quite vociferously and quite rapidly, and unfortunately there's a few people who do believe, but I just keep going forward. It's not a problem for me. So I was ignored, and I was amazed and astounded in reviewing the testimony. 2 FBI agents lied on the witness stand, Paul Stombaugh, for one, and another gentleman, I say gentleman, another Fred Whitehurst, who was the good guy, who tried to expose corruption within the FBI laboratory, has been kicked out and pressured out of the bureau. Another FBI agent lied. That's come out in laboratory reports recently. And so I was, in my day, we had a great organization, not because of me, but because of a lot of good, solid, great Americans. As a matter of fact, when Mr. Hoover died, which was May of 1972, he'd been in 40 years, director. You know what he had on those congressmen, senators, don't you? We didn't have the corruption then that we do now, I'm convinced, because Hoover knew. He knew, he had the evidence. And that's another point. I'm not going to get into that. But Congress voted that there would never be another J. Edgar Hoover. He had too much power. And he may have had too much power. So they limited the term of a director to 10 years. They also voted mandatory retirement at age 55. So what does that mean? They got rid of all the, quote, Hooverites, all the good guys, as far as I'm concerned. And look what's happened in the last 23 years. A disgrace. I personally investigated the Oklahoma City bombing case. Huge cover-up. Jack Kennedy's assassination, huge cover-up. Bobby Kennedy's assassination, huge cover-up. World Trade Center, huge cover-up. Okay. Terrorism. They're using it as an excuse to take away our constitutional rights and our civil liberties. The Bilderbergs. The Illuminati, Bilderberg, New World Order, globalists are the element behind this. It dovetails into the satanic movement, and this movement has infiltrated into our intelligence community, the once great FBI and the CIA. I have, in the past, had personal contact with an individual who was head of the CIA hit squad. He had over 3,000 individuals around the world he could call upon to go out and kill somebody. That's just one phase. I've been personally burglarized 3 times. I've had at least 12 to 15 people planted on me. Right today, I've had surveillances, but no fixed surveillance. They're not even, when I say surveillances, they're watching me, okay? And I'm not paranoid. I went into Office Depot just last week. And I went in, my daughter was in the store, went in to see her. I came out to get something out of the car. And a man in front of me says, "Hey, your parking lights are on." Somebody got into my car, put my parking lights on. Went back into Home Depot, came back out. Another man says, "Hey, your headlights are on." And so I turned my headlights off. But what I'm saying is they're just letting me know that they're around. I receive harassing phone calls, and don't feel sorry for me because I don't feel sorry for myself. I've had fixed surveillances where they used to sit a quarter of a block away in their car. I lived in Hermosa Beach back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. This is an example of what's going to happen to you if you're in the system and then you come out. I would put my gun on. I had a gun permit at the time. I'd go out and get in the car. I'd drive past about 3 miles an hour, stare them down, do a U-turn, come back, 3 miles an hour, stare them down. Did that about 5 or 6 times, then come in and park behind them. One guy was so nervous he ran a red light getting out of there. And then the second one that tried that on me, I got him cornered on a one-way street. And he couldn't go frontwards or backwards, but there was a lot of traffic behind me. And I reached down under the front seat like I was going for a gun. I'm not going to tell you if I had a gun there or not, okay? And I looked over at this fellow. His eyes got big as saucers. He knew I was going to take him out in his mind. And it was a one-way street, and it went up a hill and then down. There was a lot of traffic behind, so he was already committed to go down the one-way street. I was too. I went down, waited at the bottom of the hill for him. I'm watching my rearview mirror. I see the top of his car come up over the horizon of the hill. He sees me, stops. He backs up, going the wrong direction on a one-way street. I went down around looking for him and couldn't find him. Anyway, this is what happened. As a result of Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City bombing, I gave a speech in Palm Springs, May the 4th, I think it was. And that was April the 19th, right? And I said, by the way, Cornkey, the militia fellow from Michigan was there, and I had a call from the radio talk show. I said, will you come give a speech? I said, sure, I'll give a speech to anybody. And I didn't even know Cornkey was there, but because Cornkey was there, that we had the national press, we had Time Magazine, and I don't know who all was there, Life and what have you, CNN. And at that speech, I said, within 2 weeks after World Trade Center, because of my instincts, because of my knowledge, I said there was an evil element within the government that's responsible for Oklahoma City. Now, that was right off the top of my head, okay? My instincts told me that. You know what? I was right. 100% right. And Charles Keyes has a report over here. I met Charles on one of my trips to Oklahoma City. Fantastic report. I have my own report in the back. It's 216, 17 pages long, and documents without any question that the government was involved. I had an inside investigator tell me there were at least 11 other people involved in Oklahoma City. Why? Well, you have to go back to the 1980s, George Bush Sr. administration, when the Department of Justice wrote some new anti-terrorism legislation. One of the female authors, Department of Justice attorney, made the statement publicly, and I have her name in my file someplace: before this passes, people will have to be killed. Fast forward, 1993, World Trade Center. Yosef had terrorists, right? Well, if you have, and this is again in my documentation, I have 22 years of documentation back there, my own reports. Yosef had among his group of terrorists a fellow named Salam, a 43-year-old former Egyptian officer. And Salam was an FBI informant. At the time when they solved that case so rapidly, I said, gee, they did a great job. I'm proud of the FBI. But I found out later that actually they did it through this informant, Salam. Well, at the trial, it came out that Salam had body mic on him when he interviewed or was involved with the terrorists. And he also had a body mic on when he was interviewed by the FBI. That they didn't know it, though, unfortunately. Or fortunately, actually. Because at the trial, he testified that he was commissioned to assemble the bomb for the World Trade Center in 1993. He went to the FBI and said, we're going to use a dummy bomb, aren't we? And they said, no, we're going to use a real bomb. And this came out, and the FBI couldn't deny it because of the recorded conversation that he had. He protected himself real well. So what I'm telling you is the FBI not only knew in advance the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, they furnished the ingredients for the bomb. You're saying, oh, Ted, come on. Well, I have a newspaper article back there dated October 28, 1993, New York Times, that summarizes and gives the detail of just what I've told you this very few moments ago. 6 people killed, not enough people killed. Enough as far as the family is concerned. I'm sure it's very tragic. So update, fast forward, April 19th, 1995. 168 people killed. A year later, the anti-terrorism bill passed. Now we have the World Trade Center. I received a call right after the World Trade Center collapse of the towers from a source in New York City. A group of Columbia University students were in southern Manhattan. Manhattan, you know, that's the south part of the island. And they witnessed the tower plane, the second plane coming in and the collapse of the towers, et cetera. And they said that there was an explosion on the top floors, and they heard it and they saw it, just immediately before the buildings collapsed. There was a witness on one of the TV shows, Brian Gumbel's show, October the 10th, of last year. He said he heard a secondary explosion before the towers collapsed. There was a witness who was interviewed March the 11th, the 6-month anniversary, on Fox News, primetime, who said he was in the building, he heard a secondary explosion a few minutes before the buildings collapsed. In Oklahoma City, I have an article that was written by the Oklahoma City Fire Department. It appeared in a national newspaper publication. They took 4 unexploded bombs out of Oklahoma City. There's no question in my mind they wanted that building totally destroyed. I contend that the truck bomb was a barometric bomb, which is a highly classified weapon. There were only 10 people at the time, and produced by the Hercules, developed by the Hercules, assembled and built by Nobel company in Salt Lake City. I can't think of it, but it's not important. It's in my report. And the reason that they said it was a fertilizer bomb is because they knew, and the general public would know, that McVeigh was capable of putting a fertilizer bomb together, not this bomb. And then there were bombs on the inside. I'm convinced that the barometric bomb was in the truck, and that there were 5 bombs on the inside that were supposed to explode. Carol Howe, who was a ATF informant, by the way, she wasn't treated quite as well as Salam was treated, because they tried to convict her, and she came forward after the bombing and said that she had notified the federal government about the bombing of Oklahoma City in advance. They tried her, and she was acquitted, fortunately. So there we have it. We have experts who watched the building collapse, who say that it looked, to their opinion, in their expert opinion, like an implosion. And the design engineers said that the buildings were built to take a commercial jet airline and not collapse. The one building, the plane did kind of a glancing blow, and most of the explosion, as you recall, the second plane was outside of the perimeter of the building itself. But they're claiming now, of course, and have claimed all along, the buildings collapsed because the fire, and it melted the beams, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Don't believe it. Inside job, as far as I'm concerned. There's no question about it. This is just another huge cover-up in order to take our constitutional rights and civil liberties away, as I said a few moments ago. And I, for one, am not going to stand by and let it happen. I'm going to go forward as far and as fast as I can and try to expose these people. I basically have... I basically, every dime I make goes into this cause. I have an inventory back there of $1,500. I brought it down because I want you folks to take a look at it and make copies. I don't copyright anything. Make copies. Everything I have is for the public. It's for God and country. Now, I'm going to move on to another area of corruption. Unbelievable corruption. I was contacted in the late 1980s by a group out of Lincoln, Nebraska, and they said that they had information that children were being taken out of orphanages, foster homes in the Omaha area, driven to Sioux City, Iowa, 184 miles away in private limousines, flown to Washington, D.C. in private jets for sex orgy parties with congressmen and senators. Furthermore, that there was an international child kidnapping ring that was operating in the Midwest. There was some publicity on a pornographic case out of Omaha, pictures in the paper, and 80 children came forward and said, hey, Mommy and Daddy, I know that man. As a result of that publicity, there were 4 who agreed to cooperate, 2 later recanted, 2 refused to recant, Paul Benassi and Alicia Owens. What do you think happened to them? Alicia's in solitary confinement now in the Women's State Penitentiary in Nebraska, and Paul was tried and convicted of child molestation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The long and short of it is the FBI and the Omaha Police Department refused to investigate the case, in spite of the fact that Paul Benassi had come forward and said he was part of the ring, and he was used as a decoy in parks and shopping malls, public places, to attract the kids over to the car where the adults would grab them and kidnap them and then take them off and end up selling them at auctions. Paul told me he attended 6 such auctions, some in Las Vegas and also some in Toronto. Since then, I've developed information that there have been auctions of these children all over America. Houston, Texas is one hotbed for it. What they do, and by the way, Paul said that they sell for up to $50,000 each, the kids do, and the age is from 5 and 6 years old up to 20, 21 years of age, and they put a number around their neck tied with string, and the kids are in their underwear, and these people come in and bid on them. They actually physically auction these children off. And Paul said that in one instance, it's a location about 50 miles outside of Las Vegas. There were some men there with turbans. There were some airplanes there that did not have numbers on them. There was a uniformed police officer there. Whether he was actually a police officer or not, I don't know. Paul didn't know. But this is what's going on. I also, I did go back to Nebraska, and I developed more details, more information on this. And I learned when I was back there and was interviewed by a TV company out of England known as Yorkshire Television. Yorkshire Television was over here in the early 90s. They spent 7 months putting a documentary together on this case. And it was actually listed in the TV Guide May the 4th, 1994. Also listed in newspapers around the country to be aired. Conspiracy of Silence. It was the name of the TV show. At the last minute, the rights to the show were bought out. It was ordered that the copies all be destroyed, and the show never aired. Why? Because some of our top household name politicians in Washington, D.C. were involved in sexually molesting children. I interviewed Paul for 5 hours on tape. That tape's never been made public. I interviewed I talked to Alicia Owens, but I interviewed Noreen Gosh, whose 12-year-old son was kidnapped. She has a book out, Why Johnny Can't Come Home, for 2 hours. And the documentation's there. And it's a sad, sad case. And why? Why won't they air this show? What are some of the people who are involved in it? Well, let's see. Harold Anderson, past publisher of the Omaha World Herald, is one of them that's identified. Bob Wadman, chief of police at the time in Omaha, was identified. Eugene Mahoney, former vice squad officer, Omaha, Nebraska, was identified. The head of the society page for the Omaha World Herald, identified by the kids. Boy, boy, girl, girl, it doesn't matter. The heir to the Brandeis fortune was identified. And then the list in Washington, D.C. is even more shocking than that. I learned, and I read, by the way, I have the book back there, Franklin cover-up. I also have this video. I happen to have a bootleg copy of the video. It's right here. I have a limited number back there. And thank you, sir. And what I've done is I'm in the process of reproducing this. And I'm going to use this as a guide, and also I'm going to add to it, because we have a $1 million judgment in this Nebraska case now. Okay, it's good documentation. We also have an interview with Noreen Gosh, whose 12-year-old son, as I said, was kidnapped, and the FBI refused to investigate it. Anyway, I learned about Rusty Nelson. Rusty Nelson is mentioned in the book, the Franklin cover-up, and Here it is. John DeCamp wrote this. John's one of my heroes. John's ex-CIA, by the way. So there's some good guys in there, too. And anyway, I learned that Rusty Nelson, who was a photographer, had disappeared when the case broke. And John DeCamp called me one day and said, I've located Rusty. Where is he? He's in jail in Portland, Oregon. And this was years later. So he had been arrested for not having a tail light, and he's a professional photographer. He had 200,000 pictures in his back of his van, and the police claimed he had some pictures of nudes, not porno, but pictures of nudes, which I guess every professional photographer does that sort of thing. And they claimed that one of the nudes was an underage female, and they tried him and convicted him, and he was sentenced to 2 years, and he never faced his accuser. They never identified this so-called witness, this girl. Okay. But Rusty served his time. He was on probation for 2 years. I learned he was a photographer at these parties in Washington, D.C., and in Omaha, Nebraska, and in Iowa City, Iowa. By the way, this ties into homosexual ring. They were taking these kids from Omaha to Des Moines, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Madison, back for leading businessmen in those communities. But Rusty was out of jail. His probation was over. Last fall, I located him living in a barn in Oregon, outside of Salem, Oregon, as a matter of fact. And so I drove up there and got him, brought him back to Las Vegas. He stayed with me for several weeks. And Rusty told me the story about how he was recruited into this group. He was there, as I said, their official photographer. Well, there were two of them. He was one of them. And he's a farm boy, just a good old country farm boy from Nebraska someplace. Father was a wealthy farmer, as a matter of fact. And in the meantime, I've met the parents. In fact, I had Thanksgiving dinner with the parents last year. But he'd never seen the bright lights of the big city. So he goes to Omaha, he's a photographer, and he gets a job in a gay nightclub taking pictures, and that's where he was recruited. And they'd fly him all over the United States in these private jets, and he would take pictures, and then when the roll was over, they'd grab the roll and control it. Well, Rusty threw a couple of his own rolls in there on occasion. And the pictures he took were of some interesting people, okay? And I said, Rusty, we need to go get those pictures. Where'd you hide them? Where'd you stash them? Well, he stashed them all over the United States, in caves, in mines, under waterfalls in the Colorado. And he had some in the back of his van. He had some hidden on a farm in Nebraska. And so I said, let's go. So my idea is to do this. Interview Rusty, Noreen Gosh, Paul Benassi, my 5-hour interview with him, come in and do another video, Conspiracy of Silence. Sell this. This is a little overpriced and it's not a good production, quality-wise. Sell this in order to raise the money to go out and do this second video. Nobody's going to buy me out. $1 million, $2 million, nothing. Nothing's going to buy me out. So I said, Rusty, let's go. Let's go, Rusty. And we got in my little 4-cylinder Nissan pickup truck, headed out to Colorado. I slept in the cab of that truck for 12 days. Didn't shave, grew a beard. This is what's left of the beard, by the way, a little old mustache. My daughter says, it looks like you're trying to grow a mustache because it's, I don't like the bushy things. And we hit several locations. We didn't find the pictures, but there were some areas where we did not have the capability of getting to that location. Like, for example, we were snowed out in about, one of the pictures was hidden, some of the pictures hidden like 400 feet from the top of the mountain, another was in a mine and so forth. Anyway, we're going back this spring, Rusty and I are. This is probably summer, June, July. We're going to get those pictures, and we're going to include them in the next video, okay? Now, I've agreed to relent some time to my buddy over here, who came up with a phenomenal idea for a referendum. And it's such a good idea that I think you people need to know about it. So I've agreed to give my last 10 minutes to my good friend, Glenn Elliott. But before I do, be sure to come back. I have a limited number of these videos left. You can also order them. I only have like 7 or 8 left. And also the Franklin cover-up book. Anyway, I'm going to relinquish to Glenn. Oh, by the way, also a freebie on this if you buy one of the videos, because a friend of mine bought some land outside San Bernardino. He went out to examine it. He was met by soldiers with automatic weapons. Long story short, he fights, goes into court, loses the property. He's a musician, and he made this CD called Judas of D.C., and it's going hot on the college campuses now. And that's where we need to go. We need to go on college campuses. Remember the 60s? Okay. Okay. Glenn, come on up here. Glenn has this idea for referendum. I think it's phenomenal. And I said, Glenn, you got to present that this weekend. So he's going to take my last 10 minutes. Okay, Glenn.
Thank you all very much. My time is kind of limited, and so I'm going to be compressing a lot of things and moving on. So if my message, if what I want to do and what I want to present is important, we're going to have to concentrate a little here. I'm going to take about 45 seconds and tell you about my relationship with Ted. I moved to Los Angeles in 1983. I was a martial artist and firearms instructor running some security operations. And I was hired to be Larry Flint's personal bodyguard when he was running for president. I became assistant director of security and then eventually head of security. And that's where I met Ted. I hired him and some associates. And he and I have worked together on things and been friends for 19 years. And he's never let me down. He's been a friend. He's fearless against evil and wrongdoing. And I came up with this idea recently and ran it by him. And I think it has some merit, and I'm going to need your help and some input. If anybody wants to contact me, the way I've chosen is with email. So that would be Elliott, ELLIOTT _ Beck, BECK, at yahoo.com. And I'll get back to anybody that has some input on it. The reason I am here, there's some anger in my voice, because as someone that maybe a few of you know, Tim in Florida, who used to live in Malibu, he told me I could become the poster boy for your organization. In the last couple of years, I was defrauded by a law firm. As one lawyer with 28.5 years experience said, it was the worst case of fraud against the client that he ever heard of. They waited 2 years until after the statute of limitations for malpractice in California, and then they came after me. They submitted false documents to the court. They lied in front of the judge. Okay? And then 5 weeks before a motion for summary judgment, a judge told my attorney not to say anything because we were winning. And 5 weeks later, another judge granted a motion for summary judgment against them for $89,000 when the previous judge had said in court, and the clerk had said in court, and I've got the transcript, that they didn't follow the law. Okay? And I had a credit rating of 751 out of 800, and the bankruptcy papers are filled out. 2 weeks ago today, the Sheriff's Department, and I've got a badge with another Sheriff's Department, the Sheriff's Department in Los Angeles County had a woman in a baby stroller across my house from 7:30 in the morning till 11 o'clock in the morning. My son, who's 11 years old and is in the Civilian Air Patrol, put on his camis and some high-quality binoculars and went out by a bush and saw 2 guys in a vehicle about a quarter of a mile away, one behind the steering wheel, another one with big binoculars watching my house, and trying to serve me with papers to call me in for a debtor's hearing where they want to get you to lie under oath about your assets so then they can go after that. And having 4 black belts in the martial arts, I posed to myself a warrior's oath. I said, these people are going to pay. And I don't have a lot of time to go over it, but what I've come up with is if you are going to fight a battle, on the battlefield of your opponent, where he chooses the battlefield and he makes the rules, you're going to lose every time. And what happened to me in the court process, and I was somewhat ignorant of the court process, is when you walk down an alley, every lane is a dead end, and they got an answer for everything. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to change the rules. California is known as a state where trends start, and it heads back to other states. And California is also known where some of the most sophisticated corruption that's going on in the judicial system starts. So I've come up with a way where we're going to reverse it on them. And just like Howard Jarvis did with the tax thing, I have something here. I just thought of this about a week and a half ago, and I just wrote down some ideas. I only have about 3 or 4 minutes, so I'm just going to go over some of it. One of the things to do is come up with something that they can't attack. In California, with the initiative process, it can become part of the California Constitution. And after Roberti Roos, when they did their so-called assault weapons bill, term limits were passed. And the LA Times recently, and there was just a vote recently, to try to rescind the term limits. 60% of the people in California said, no, 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 no. No, 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 no. We're going to keep the term limits. We don't trust these guys that much. So I came up with this idea I've tentatively called the California Citizens Legal Reform Initiative. I got 3 minutes, okay. One of the things they do is they cut a lot of deals among themselves and in private and even before they go into the thing. So how about an initiative that says that video recording of all legal proceedings, copies to both parties at prevailing commercial rates. B, video recording of all proceedings against judges that will be recorded. The judges that rule on complaints against other judges are granted immunity, and it's a private session. I was recently with a lawyer in a law library. 10 years ago, there were about 600 complaints a year against judges. Now there's about 1,000. Are closed, in closed sessions, with nothing done at all. In the last 10 years, out of about 7,500 complaints, only about 10 judges have been removed for misconduct. No ex parte deals. They love cutting deals like they did with me when when people aren't there. Let's make it a crime or find some way to make them accountable for it. Okay. Two more points and then I'll finish here because I'm pressed for time. I want to make it duty of all government employees, attorneys, and officers of the court to find the truth and protect the innocent. That will be their top priority. In civil cases, this will take precedence over preponderance of evidence. In other words, they can't say, well, this side did a better job than that side, even though I think in the back of my mind there's a lie going on here. And then finally, we've got to do something about the summary judgment. Because once they grant the summary judgment, then they bring the power of the state to destroy you. They strip all your assets and then say, well, if you were innocent, why didn't you keep on fighting? So I'm going to conclude by saying then the California Citizens Legal Reform Initiative, I was going to call it the Judicial Reform Initiative, but we got to keep it simple. And we've got to get millions of people behind this. How can they attack something like this? It takes the rug out on it. What are they going to say? Well, we don't want cameras in the courtroom because the attorneys are going to be acting it up for the camera. Sorry, Your Honor. That's what you're there for. You're controlling the court. So I'm going to finish up here. We're running out of tape. But if you want to contact with me, email, I need your ideas. Then I'm going to take it to some of the central committees, Republicans and Democrats. And we're going to then we got to get plugged in with the money. And I've researched this with people that have no political types, not like us, just people on the street. Everybody knows about a crooked judge or crooked lawyers. So if you'll help me on this, I really need your help. Thanks very much.
Okay, before we take a break, I want to make an announcement. We provide envelopes for you with some additional information, like the pictures of the speakers. Some of you do not have the pictures of the speakers and the brochure that got mailed out. So be sure to, on your way in, if get one or it is red, you can just pick them up. Okay, there's going to be an envelope for you with some other additional information about the rally that you can on your way out or any either way pick up. Okay, so let's be back in your seats at 11:20. We start with Charles Key.